Hey guys, Luke here with a quick side note. So today we're going to be tying a Northern Pike fly. So this is a variation, one of my variations of a very well-known pike fly known as a pike bunny, and they're named after the big bunny strip that you use when tying them. So these are pretty much everything you're looking for in a pike lure or a pike fly. They've got big bright colors, a lot of movement in that tail. I tie some legs in mine just to give it, again, a little bit of added movement, and then I tie a big brawny head on here. And what that does is it actually pushes water as the fly moves through the water, and that the vibrations that this fly creates are actually picked up by Northern Pike, and it brings them in, makes them want to crush this bad boy. Another key feature on this is the eyes, and I tie really big eyes on that, and that's because pike are very, very keyed in on eyes and their prey, and they actually hit their prey from head on, so they're looking for those eyeballs. So I tie big eyes on there. So the materials I'm using for this fly today, for the tail, I'm using a big sonker strip. This is rabbit hair. And then I'm using some barred rubber legs for those legs. I'm using some flash boo. I've got some orange bucktail. I've got some dyed UV polar chenille. For my hook, I've got a 2/0 Gamakatsu stinger hook. And then I use a little bit of lead wire to give it some weight in the front so it'll actually swim as I pull it through the water column. I've got some big wapsi eyes for those eyes. I'm gonna be using UV resin to attach those. And then I'm using 210 denier line, or 210 denier thread, excuse me, for my base thread. So what I'm gonna start doing with this fly to start it off is just get a really nice thread base on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my thread going here on the hook shank. Go ahead and trim this bad boy off. So we get a nice even thread base all along that hook shank, all the way from the eye of the hook to the back of the straight of the shank. And yeah, just what that's going to do is it creates a nice thread base for you to tie your materials into. And then when I get back to the back end of the hook here, I'm going to create just a little bit of a bump. And what that's going to do is make sure that my materials, as they come off the back of the hook, are coming straighter off the back of the hook, as opposed to curling down here by the bend in the hook. And that way they'll have less chance of fouling in the hook. So the first thing I'm going to tie in is a little bit of orange bucktail. So I'm just going to cut a little tiny piece of this bucktail off. Now the reason that I use orange bucktail is because it's a very rigid material, and it extends out past the shank of the hook and kind of keeps some of those less rigid materials from kind of coming around and fouling and actually wrapping around the hook shank as I fish. So I just get a nice bunch of bucktail like that. Again, it doesn't matter exactly if it's like perfectly even for that tail. This is one of the wonderful things about pike flies is they really are not, they don't have to be perfect. These are just bright, big, bright, ugly flies, kind of like the fish you catch on them. So now I've got that bucktail in there. The next material I'm gonna come in with is just a little bit of flash boo. This just gives a little bit of spark to the fly. So as you're bringing it through the water column, it'll shed some light off of it, and pike pick up on that because most of the things they hunt are bright-sided like bait fish. And so they throw, their scales will reflect light off into the water column, and so those these nice big flashy bits help add to that effect. Again, pretty liberally attaching that with quite a bit of thread. And I'm going to cut that excess off the front there. And again, I'm not super worried about how long it is. I usually do about 2 extra hook shank lengths back for the length of my tail, but again, doesn't really necessarily matter. So now I'm gonna bring in my bunny strip, which is the defining feature of this fly. And I like to cut, I don't know, about a 6-inch strip of bunny fur. And these are big fat zonker strips. Typically with pike flies, The Magnum strips, the big bunny strips, work a little bit better. You don't necessarily need them, but it just gives a little bit more body to the fly. But what I'm gonna start by doing is just measuring about 2 hook shank lengths for that tail, and that's how far back it's gonna be. I want it right in, kind of in line with that extra material. And then what I'm gonna do is come in here, lick my fingers a little bit just to get a little bit more traction with that hair. I'm gonna part that hair so that I can attach it using my thread. And I want that tail to be attached all the way at the back of the shank, so I'll make sure my thread is back there. And again, right on top of the fly, holding that strip down in place. I'm gonna wrap in a couple nice tight wraps. And then I'm gonna pull my strip back out of the way there. Run a couple more thread wraps up in front of it. I'm gonna bring my thread about 3/4 of the way up. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take that same zonker strip that I was using for the tail. I'm actually gonna wrap it around the shank of the fly, and this is gonna create a nice big body. This is gonna add to the body of that fly. This is part of what's pushing a bunch of water out in front of the fly, creating those vibrations in the water column, and attracting those pike to this fly. So I'm gonna wrap this about halfway up the hook shank. And again, just kind of using, so you can use water. I use a little bit of spit, just to control that fur, get it out of the way. And again, I'm gonna get to about halfway on that, and then you should have a little tag end, a couple nice secure wraps there, and then kind of peel it back, wrap in there. I'm gonna come in, cut that excess strip out, trying not to cut my thread, which I do all the time. It's really frustrating when you do cut your thread, because a lot of times your material all come flying off your fly. Now I'm gonna pull that material back out of the way and just wrap back on top of it a little bit. And again, I'm not being too afraid to be pretty liberal with this thread. Now I've got a nice working body on that fly. So now's when I'm gonna add in my legs. So again, I got these barred legs. I like to put 2 on each side. You can put on as many as you want. Some people think the more the merrier. Again, this is just gonna give all that good movement to that fly. These things tend to move around quite a bit as you're stripping the fly in. And yeah, really kind of attract those pike. Again, pike are attracted to flash, movement, eyes. So I mean, kind of the bigger the better. Lay them in, and I really just want them chilling just kind of past and right into the actual curvature of the hook. I don't like them to be a lot longer than that, because they'll come around and they'll foul inside the hook there. So just kind of tie them about the length of your hook there. This is just creating a little bit of movement in that fly. I just do a couple loose wraps, and then I kind of move them into position where I like them, and then I snug them down, because they'll want to twist around on you. Now keep the tail or the excess of those legs kind of out in front. I like to tie them about midway on those legs if I can, because what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use that same set of legs to wrap it around the other side of my fly. And again, you can roll it over so you can get a better look at it here. And again, a couple loose wraps, maneuvering those legs into where I want them, and holding them in place as I snug it down. And just, again, coming in with some good wraps to secure those in place. I'm actually gonna cut these just a little bit. They're a little longer and I like them on the side. So now I've got some legs sticking out again. That's just gonna move water. It's gonna create some movement. Now I'm gonna come in with my lead wire, okay? I'm just gonna strip off a piece. It's about 1.5 inches long of that lead wire. And I'm gonna wrap it in on the base here, right where my fur and my legs were just attached. And I'm gonna wrap that lead wire in where my head's gonna be. Again, this doesn't need to be pretty, it doesn't need to be perfect, because I'm gonna cover most of this up with thread and material. This is just giving the head of my fly some weight so it'll swim through that water column, creating movement from my tail. So when the head of your fly weighs a little bit more, what it does is it allows that fly to move through the water column because the head wants to sink while the tail wants to float. So as you strip, your fly will come up and then the head will be the first part to sink. So as you strip, it swims along like a fish, creating a movement that's going to attract pike. And again, I come in over the top pretty liberally with this thread. Again, this doesn't need to be pretty. My eyes are going to come in over the top of this. And I'm also going to have some more material here, so it doesn't need to be perfect. Now I've got my dyed UV polar chenille. This stuff's great. It's kind of big and unwieldy, but works great for these big flashy flies. You don't need a ton of this. I'm just going to cut off, I don't know, a little over an inch or so of this material to tie into my fly. And this is a little bit longer than I want it to be because as I wrap it in, it's going to lay back on the fly like this. So what I do is I kind of bunch it together and I'm going to hold it over my trash can to do this, but I'm actually going to cut about half of this off just so it's not as long. And now when I attach this, I'm going to attach it at just a bit of an angle so the thread has the ability to grab on to the base of that. But I don't want too much of an angle because as I go to wrap it, I want it to wrap in nice and evenly. It's got too sharp of an angle, it won't wrap nice. Again, coming in pretty heavy with that thread, not being too afraid to be pretty liberal with that. Bringing my thread back to the front of my hook. Wrapping back kind of on top of that there. And then I'm going to wrap that in, just gradually coming forward with it as I wrap. Once I get it to a spot, it feels good. Again, nice and snug here. I'm going to hold it in place with my left hand and try to wrap in on top of it with my right hand. It doesn't have to be perfect. Wrap them back over the top of it. Trim those extra fibers out of the way here later. So I'm just about ready to finish this fly, at least for the thread wrapping part, and move on to building a head. So I like to come in here and just kind of cover all this material up using this 210 denier thread. And this is going to be the start of my head. So then I'm going to come in and use my whip finish to finish this fly. Now whip finish, what this does is it allows me to tie. So usually you use half hitches to tie and finish your fly, but what a whip finish does is it allows you to start a singular half hitch and actually add about as many half hitches as you want, kind of moving back in on it. So I can do 5, 6, 7, 8, and then come around to wrap to finish that half hitch and seal your fly in place. I like to do this twice just to be secure. The way I know I did it right is if I pull in the opposite direction of my thread, it should cinch down and not move. And you'll notice it cinched down there. So I'm going to cut that excess thread off. Trim a little bit of that material out of the way. So now I'm going to use just a little bit of crazy glue to secure the thread on this fly because these pike actually hit these flies from the front. And so they tend to tear up the thread pretty badly. So after catching about 4 or 5 fish, this fly will get beat up, just kind of get more burly and burly again. That's why these don't necessarily need to be the most beautiful things on the planet. So the final touch, like I said, I like to use these big old eyeballs. So I've got these big wopsy eyes. Those are going to stick to either side of that big ball of thread that I created as a head there. He's got a little bit of adhesive on him, but I'm going to use my UV resin to attach these and simultaneously form a head. So I just kind of like to have them even on both sides. I put a decent amount of pressure on them to hold them in place, and they should stick on fairly well. Now, if it wasn't for pike being vicious, aggressive predators, I could probably leave this fly just like this, but the adhesive on these eyes isn't nearly enough to hold them in place with these big toothy fish just crushing away on this bad boy. So I'm gonna come in with a little bit of UV resin, and I'm gonna build a head. Starting on the top here. This will take some time because I gotta kind of do it layer by layer. I'm gonna just add a bit of UV resin right down the middle, but let it seep into the sides there by the eyes. And I'm gonna hit it with my UV light, let it harden up. This takes about 5 or 10 seconds before that resin will start to set up. Again, just covering it real well. And then you just start to layer that resin in. That's how you're gonna create the head of this fly. This is the longest process in making this and tying this fly. You just gotta be patient, come in layer by layer, making sure those eyes are nice and secured. And this nice big head pushes a ton of water. And so, again, sending out those vibrations in the water, which the pike will pick up on and come looking for lunch. I'm gonna roll it over, do the same thing on the bottom. Come in here with my UV light. Come in one more time on the top here. And this is probably the longest part of this fly here, is just building up this head with UV resin. And the more time you put into this, the more secure those eyes are gonna be, and the longer this fly will last. So it's worth taking your time on this part. I always check them. Those are pretty good. Yeah, and there you go. Got yourself a nice bright orange pike bunny fly. It's got all the aspects that we're looking for. Got a bunch of bright colors, some wiggly legs, some flash. It's got this tail, which really likes to move in the water column, and that big old hook in the front, and some nice big eyeballs for those pike to come looking for. That bad boy should definitely catch some fish. But if you guys have a particularly favorite pike fly or lure, let us know in the comments below. If you guys like what you saw, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time on the Side Trail.